Were both of Aegon the Conqueror's children actually bastard-born? Was Aegon the Dragon infertile? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings, The Witcher and much more. If you love in-depth discussion of great fantasy and science fiction, welcome. This video was produced in collaboration with the wonderful History of Westeros. Please check out their channel and podcast. There's a link in the description. Aegon the Conqueror is the founding father of Targaryen rule in Westeros. It was his invasion. He is the king after whom King's Landing was named. The Iron Throne was his throne. Every Targaryen who ruled after him was descended from him. And yet, there were always rumours that perhaps his children who followed him onto the throne weren't his children. And indeed, there are some peculiar circumstances around the births of both Aenys and Maegor. Let's take a look and see what the histories tell us and decide for ourselves. Before he was king, Aegon Targaryen was Lord of Dragonstone, a title he inherited after the passing of his father, Lord Aegon. The details of his early life aren't entirely clear, but our best guess is that Lord Aegon died when Aegon was between the ages of 16 and 24. We do, however, know that Aegon was a dragon rider before he was married, and he was married twice. It appears that he married his sister Visenya, his elder by 2 years, before their father died, and married their younger sister Rhaenys after their father died. Between these two marriages, only 2 children were produced, and that by itself is noteworthy, especially the marriage with Rhaenys, as the histories are quite clear that it was a marriage of love. It was said that for every night he spent with Visenya, he spent 10 with Rhaenys. Here's where the rumours begin. We're told that, whilst no one ever questioned Visenya's fidelity to her brother-husband, Rhaenys surrounded herself with comely young men, and, it was whispered, even entertained some in her bedchambers on the nights when Aegon was with her elder sister. How much is exaggerated and how much is omitted we can't say, but we can say that when the conquest began, Aegon was 27, and neither marriage, nor dalliance, if there were any, had produced any children. The conquest required the siblings to spend large portions of time apart, further decreasing the likelihood that an heir was forthcoming, especially Queen Rhaenys, Aegon's preferred partner, who spent much time in Dorne, unsuccessfully attempting to subjugate it. Yet despite their failures in Dorne, the conquest was remarkably swift overall, and the new Targaryen regime proved adept at managing the new kingdom. Still, the might of their dragons could be undermined by their lack of babies. Aegon and his sister wives were the last Targaryens at the time, and 5 years after the invasion, they were all in their 30s with no children on the horizon. Who would inherit? What an oddly unique position Visenya and Rhaenys were in. From Aegon's position, it seemingly made no matter which of his queens had a child, as long as there was at least one Targaryen capable of continuing their line, but the 2 queens knew that they were in a strange race of sorts. Rhaenys and Visenya lived in a constant state of knowing that, at any moment, one of them could become the mother to the future of the Targaryen dynasty, while also knowing that being first wasn't a certainty, given any pregnancy could result in a girl who could be surpassed by a boy in the line of succession, or that child might not survive. There's no evidence that the sisters were directly competitive with each other, and there's no hint of violence between them either, but they were both realistic enough to understand the position they were in, and that their children, if they had any, might be in peril. Because their descendants would not share their sisterhood and resulting bond. Think of when Catelyn warned that Jon might come for Robb's sons. Robb angrily denied that possibility due to their bond, but when Catelyn pointed out that Jon's sons would not have such a bond with his own, he had less to say. And indeed, Rhaenys and Visenya's descendants would go to war. The first, but far from the last, Targaryen civil war in Westeros. But that's in the future. At this point in time, there still weren't any descendants at all to speak of, and that likely made a lot of people anxious. Some may have worried that if no heir were conceived, the newly forged realm would descend into chaos and blood as new powers would inevitably rise. Could it be that the most powerful man in Westeros was incapable of fathering children? Why not? We know that many saw the Targaryens as offensive in the eyes of the Seven, and a failure to father heirs could be seen as divine disfavour. And if we look at it simply, We'd have to admit anyone can be born sterile, and perhaps it's even more likely for families with such high frequency of the very incest that the worshippers of the Seven call blasphemous. Some may have whispered that it wasn't Aegon but his sisters who lacked the ability to father heirs. The gossip could have been quite fierce, and the worries over what would come if no heirs ever did would be fierce as well. But at last, in the year 7 AC, when Aegon was 34 and Rhaenys 32 or 33, the first ever Targaryen prince was born. Seemingly named after his mother, Aenys, a boy, would inherit the Iron Throne if he outlived his father, which he did almost exactly 3 decades later. But only 3 years later, Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes were shot down over the hellholt of House Ulla, and the young boy was understandably traumatized. He began to regress in his childhood development and showed none of his father's or aunt's fierceness. We're told that so unlike King Aegon was he, that a few even dared to suggest that his grace was not the boy's true sire, that Aenys was some bastard-born of one of Queen Rhaenys' many handsome favourites, the son of a singer or a mummer or a mime. We get no word on what happened to those who dared to make that suggestion, but it's noteworthy that the rumours were loud enough to have been recorded for posterity. An argument against her cheating is that Rhaenys would be taking a huge risk if her child were born with non-Targaryen features, but there's no reason to assume she was careless with her surrogate. There are plenty of silver-haired men to be found on Dragonstone, Driftmark and elsewhere, especially the city of Lys. But note how the quote suggests the rumours began in response to Aenys' weakness, not because of any actual evidence of infidelity. Still, as we noted, it's undeniable that Rhaenys had a strong incentive to make sure the dynasty didn't collapse over a simple lack of heirs, not to mention the incentive to have a child before her sister. So she may have cheated in more ways than one. If you've seen the HBO show Rome, which George R. R. Martin was a big fan of, we've got a clear and present example. Cleopatra there began a relationship with Julius Caesar, but upon learning he had dozens of prior partners but only one child, she took it upon herself to sleep with one of his guards in secret to ensure she conceived with the Roman, so that her baby might also look Roman. It worked, she had a son, and Caesar believed it to be his. So was Aenys, who would rule as Aenys the First Targaryen after Aegon's death, not actually Aegon's child? Well, that was certainly the rumour when he was young. He seemed to inherit almost none of his father's physical attributes or strengths. Rhaenys seems to have enjoyed spending time with artists and singers, and Aenys grew up to be a man who loved art and had a great singing voice. Rhaenys certainly had every reason to want a child to continue the line, and after presumably many years of trying with Aegon, none had arrived, so at the very least we have to acknowledge that the rumours were there for good reason. But the rumours did stop as Aenys grew older. As his dragon Quicksilver grew and strengthened, so did he. He looked and acted Targaryen, and of course he could always have just taken after his mother rather than his father. In short, there is nothing conclusive here. So let's move on to Visenya and Aegon. Visenya was Aegon's first wife and the oldest of the 3 siblings, but now Rhaenys' son was heir. And when Rhaenys died in the year 10 AC, Aenys regressed. He had always been a sickly and weak child, but now we read that her death left the boy prince inconsolable. He stopped eating, and even began to crawl as he had when he was 1, as if he had forgotten how to walk. His father despaired of him, and rumours flew about the court that King Aegon might take another wife, as Rhaenys was dead and Visenya childless and perhaps barren. This, let's remember, is at a time when there were rumours that Aenys wasn't even Aegon's child in the first place. It's possible that Visenya started those rumours, though we have no proof, but regardless, she will certainly have been aware of them. Visenya was a highly intelligent woman, a politically savvy Targaryen hardliner who was not unaware of the need for a strong succession. She will almost certainly have had doubts about whether young Aenys would be capable of holding the newly forged Iron Throne, and may have decided there was a need for a backup plan. With her sister queen fallen, she was the only possibility for another true-born prince or princess. Only 1 year later, in 11 AC, Visenya announced that she was pregnant with a son. Whether this was bravado or foreknowledge is hard to say, but it came to pass, and Maegor was born on Dragonstone the following year. Given she was about 40 during her pregnancy, and the whispers that she was barren had persisted for so long prior to this, it was surprising to many. Of course, it's quite possible, even likely, that this was merely a normal birth, a long shot rather than a sign of the supernatural. But there is definitely another level to this. Visenya's career was marked by identifying and eliminating risk to Targaryen rule. It was she who formed the Kingsguard, she who understood the threat of the faith and was said to have once slain an assassin with Dark Sister. Would she have left the fate of House Targaryen in the hands of a single weak boy? What would she do to ensure the strength of the succession? Or if she or one of her siblings was a dreamer, or writings from her ancestors such as Daenys the Dreamer led her to believe her house would be needed to stop some great future threat to the world, then her incentive would be all the greater and more grave, a succeed-at-all-costs endeavour. Perhaps most importantly, it suggested that Visenya was a dabbler in black magic. There are no details given, and we are told this by the maesters who frequently dismissed capable women as magic users, and usually black magic users, so we should take all this with a pinch of salt. But when it comes to possibilities, we can imagine quite a bit, especially when we look at the life of Maegor, the son that Visenya had so unexpectedly. He was the largest and strongest Targaryen known to us, extremely cruel, humorless, paranoid, and possessed of a trait often associated with genetic modifications and crossbreeding, sterility. Not only did Maegor the Cruel never sire a living child, he sired multiple stillborn children so monstrous in form that natural simply does not fit. So a story can easily be constructed that Visenya saw Aenys weak and regressing as a child after his mother's death, and used black magic to get herself pregnant, thus protecting Targaryen rule in Westeros, and how Maegor turned out was the result of that black conception. Which sounds plausible, but again we have no proof. There are suspicions about both of Aegon's children, so perhaps he was sterile. From one perspective, the idea that Rhaenys and or Visenya went outside their marriage to ensure heirs for House Targaryen is quite compelling. They both have simple and potentially supernatural means of doing so, and multiple straightforward motives. So there's an undoubted possibility here, perhaps several, but if either queen bent the rules, shall we say, they covered their tracks well enough that the rumours never gained backing in actual facts. Or perhaps Aegon turned a blind eye, or even secretly approved. If he did suspect that he couldn't have children, and if he was desperate for the Targaryen line to continue, perhaps he was okay with his sister wives having children by other means, provided they were discreet and people believed they were his. Ultimately, the most straightforward answer has to remain that both Aenys and Maegor are Aegon's children. They just took after their mothers more than their fathers. But there is undeniably the possibility that there is a secret here, that Aegon couldn't have children, that the second and third kings of Westeros were not his offspring, and that none of the Targaryens to follow are his descendants. It's possible. But dark truths like these are the kind that surely all involved would have taken to their graves, leaving us to wonder and guess. But what do you think? Were Aenys and Maegor Aegon's natural children, or not? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link to my playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.